The people of Castlebar have been commemorating the life of one of the most famous people ever to come out of County Mayo. We're talking about opera singer Margaret Burke Sheridan, who died 50 years ago this year. Now, in her lifetime, she was described by Puccini, no less, as the greatest Madame Butterfly ever to grace the opera stage. Well, our Dermot Peavoy has been looking into her life and times, the life and times of a great Castlebar lady.
I dreamt that I dwelt in marble halls, with vases and serfs at my side.
The Linen Hall Art Centre in Castlebar, County Mayo. Last April saw the opening of an anniversary exhibition here to honour the town's most famous daughter, who died 50 years ago this year. Margaret Burke Sheridan, born in Castlebar, adored in Italy. For over a decade, leading lady of the greatest Italian opera houses and of London's Covent Garden. This special anniversary exhibition was opened in Sheridan's hometown by her biographer, Anne Chambers.
Maybe Castlebar will reclaim their most famous daughter now and not wait for another 50 years before she is celebrated.
Margaret Burke Sheridan, known to her friends as Maggie or Peggy, was most famous for her roles in the operas of Puccini, particularly for her role as Cho-Cho-san in Madame Butterfly. The exhibition included a magnificent Japanese kimono given to Margaret to celebrate her performances in this role. Another costume, admired by the crowds, dates from her performances in the title role in Puccini's opera Manon Lescaut. For this, she was assisted by Puccini himself.
This is the costume worn by Margarita Sheridan in Manon Lescaut. And Manon Lescaut has significance because for that role she was coached personally by Puccini. And Puccini actually went to hear her performance in a little theatre at Cento and drove with her in an open carriage after the performance through the streets of the little village to the acclaim of the villagers.
It's nearly 20 years since Anne Chambers published her biography of Margaret Burke Sheridan, and her home in Dublin has been a repository for the memorabilia she collected while researching the book. Much of this will now be donated to the Mayo County Library. Anne traced the soprano's life story at home and abroad.
Well, you start, of course, in Castlebar, but then I moved on to Italy and I spent some time in Italy, literally following in her footsteps, not quite knowing really where she went, but just one lead leading on to the other. I started in La Scala in Milan and I got access to the archives there, and from there then I knew she had performed in Cremona and Trieste and in of course in the Dal Verme also in Milan, and she had started of course in Rome, then had moved down to the very, very demanding setting of the San Carlo in Napoli. Walter McNally, her friend, remembers being in the San Carlo when she performed and people standing up on the seats shouting at the top of their voice, "Viva la Sheridan, viva l'Irlanda." As somebody said, there were only three famous Irish people known outside Ireland. There was De Valera, there was John McCormick and there was Margarita Sheridan.
The Castlebar exhibition, now ended, included an old image of the Mall in Castlebar, as this is where Sheridan's story began. This is a lovely space here and the Mall in Castlebar, and it's where it all began for Margaret, isn't it? From Maggie from Mayo. This is where she was born, wasn't it?
Yes, Margaret Burke Sheridan was born here, actually in this house on the Mall in Castlebar in 1889, and she was the youngest of a family of 5, and her father was the local postmaster. So this building here on the Mall was also the post office for the town.
Margaret could walk from here to her first school on the other side of the Mall. It was run by nuns from the local convent, but due to a family tragedy, she didn't complete her schooling in Castlebar. Margaret's mother died when she was 4 and her father passed away when she was 11. Her family was broken up and Margaret was orphaned, but proceeds from the sale of the family home allowed her to be sent to finish her education at the Dominican convent in Eccles Street in Dublin.
When she went to the Dominican convent in Dublin, Mother Clement, who was a very, very famous singing teacher, took a great interest in her and nurtured the talent that was already, I suppose, in her, and brought out really all the, I think, the warmth and the timbre that you get in Sheridan's voice. She said herself that that was really discovered in Eccles Street and nurtured. That led Margaret onto the next step of her musical development.
When she won a gold medal at Dublin's Feis Ceoil, admirers raised funds to send Margaret to study at the Royal Academy of Music in London. Later, singing in London, she caught the ear of the inventor Marconi. He brought her to Rome in 1916 for operatic coaching by an eminent maestro. Her big break came 2 years later.
This is the Costanzi Opera House, which is now the Opera House in Rome. And down here was the flat of the manager of the Opera House. A woman, very unusual, who was the famous Emma Corelli, who had been a terrific singer herself in her day. Sheridan is practicing here either by accident, but I would imagine on purpose, hoping that Corelli will hear her down here. Corelli was about to put on a performance of Bohème, and her soprano fell ill. And in 4 days' notice, she was desperate to get a substitute. So she heard the young Irish student singing her heart out on her balcony.
And sent for her.
And sent for her. And in 4 days, Corelli said that if she forgot everything she had learned up to now with her singing teacher, that Corelli would take her and make her into Mimi in 4 days. And that's exactly what happened. And the reviews were absolutely over the top.
Margaret's contemporary, the great Irish tenor John McCormick, was more comfortable on the concert stage than in opera, but with Margaret it was the opposite story. She would say, "How can I sing without my cloak?" meaning the costumes, sets, cast, orchestra and drama, the whole paraphernalia of opera. And while McCormick made his fortune in America, Margaret chose to remain in Italy and Covent Garden. However, she ended her stellar operatic career after only 12 years. She'd lost confidence in her ability to sing high notes, following throat operations and the ending of a long romance. Most of Margaret Burke Sheridan's long retirement was spent in Dublin, partly in a flat here in Fitzwilliam Street. The last 6 years of her life were shared half and half between the Shelbourne Hotel and the mansion of a wealthy patron in New York. And when she died of cancer in 1958, her death was mourned throughout the operatic world.
Well, Margaret Burke Sheridan died on the 16th of April 1958, and she's buried here in Glasnevin Cemetery. And this is her tomb, and it reads Margarita Sheridan, Prima Donna, La Scala, Covent Garden. She began at the top, she finished at the top. It was only 12 years, but by golly, they were glorious ones.